for tuning into Parallel Lives. This episode, we're talking about being part of the LGBT plus community and being a maladaptive daydreamer. My name is Levi, and this is my co-host Dimmer.
Hello. Talking about that today, we have Nathan, 44 from Sweden, Wolfie, a college grad from the United States, and Emery, 19-year-old Canadian university student.
Cool. So the first question is, did being part of the LGBTQ plus community help you in learning about your maladaptive daydreaming? And if so, how?
Well, I did not know about MD until later in my life. So I knew I was a part of the LGBT plus community a little bit earlier in my adult life. So I really didn't know about how that intersected with MD until I started learning about what MD was. I guess later on I found out that yes, there are some things about my orientation that go into my daydreams, but I didn't know if that was like MD coming first or later. I started MDing when I was a little kid, so it must have been first, but I just didn't know it was there. So yeah, I don't know how if it helped me learn about MD. It was more, I think it might have been the other way around.
For me, I think just like Wolfie just said, I started MDing when I was really, really small. I was 5 years old when I started daydreaming in this immersive way. And at the thing is, from that point, I actually realized that I was a boy rather than a girl. So that's also been part of me all my life. But I wasn't like I'm still not actively a part of the LGBTQ plus community because I really came out so recently. So I've been living in the closet to most of the world for 40 years. And I saw a connection between daydreaming and my being transgender and actually also being a gay person because I'm actually I feel like a man, but I feel like a gay man. I saw that about a decade ago, and that was a revelation to me that I saw that they are probably in my case connected. It's hard to say if being transgender or being gay helped me learning anything about maladaptive daydreaming. They sort of came together, and yeah, like I said, I made a connection suddenly and started realizing things, but that was about a decade ago.
And then Emery, what about you?
For that question, I don't think so much for me. Maybe so, it's more, for me, it's more the other way. Well, MD helped me learn about that. But being part of the community, didn't, yeah, for me, it's more the other way that MD helped me learn about being queer rather than the other way around.
That kind of leads into the second question. How is your identity involved when it comes to maladaptive daydreaming? Does it come through? Does it show in your daydreams or inspire daydreams?
This is sort of a question that really is the main question for me as a maladaptive daydreamer, actually, which defines whether I am a maladaptive daydreamer or not. And by that I mean, when I first learned about maladaptive daydreaming as a term, that was just in February this year. So I realized quickly that I don't have the same problem as others with in terms of the amount of time I use for daydreaming. That's never been the problem for me. But every time I daydream, from 5 years old and onwards, I I daydreamt from the perspective of a boy and later a man every single time. And everything I daydream about has to do with that. So it's the very fabric of my daydreams. From puberty and onwards, I realized that I was drawn to boys and men, and I became, in my head, I still am, I believe I am, a gay man. And it doesn't matter what the plot is in my daydream, I'm always a gay man. So this is like, it's sort of why I daydream, and that was what I realized 10 years ago, that I have escaped into my head because I can't be the person I think I am in real life because I have the wrong body. And that was an insight for me. And I got really scared, and I realized that, okay, I daydream like this, seems harmless, but it has really changed my life, like tremendously. And this must be bad. Like, that's the maladaptive part for me, not the amount of time, but being able to escape into something that postpones having to deal with something in your life. And I think a lot of people who are MDers, they can relate to that. They dream of a perfect life, and instead of doing things and taking care of things in their real lives, they escape into the daydreams. So I really can relate to that part. But to me, I mean, does it come through in my daydreams? Does it inspire my daydreams? I would say yes, 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 yes to all of those.
That's what I feel like I just heard was that you said the maladaptive part was that it postponed coming to terms with your identity. So did MD like keep you in the closet for years longer than otherwise maybe you would have been?
Yeah, probably, I don't know, 25 years. And I can't say if that's really a bad thing. I think it's a bad thing because you can't tell if it's a bad thing. But in my case, I actually don't regret anything in my life, really. I mean, I'm really happy with where I am right now. So it's harsh to say that it was bad because I should have been out for 25 years and then my life would have been better. You see what I mean? But I got really scared in 2010. I was depressed, and I started realizing that I wasn't living my life as me. And that actually made me quit cold turkey maladaptive daydreaming for 18 months. Because I just freaked out. What am I doing? I'm just living in my head. I want to live in the real world.
No half measures with you.
No. I'm always on or off. That's what everyone knows.
Cold turkey. That's hard mode.
Yeah.
Wolfie, did you want to jump in there?
Sure. So after I learned about what MD was, I started to realize that all of my characters were just like me. They were all asexual. In that I had no idea how to think of somebody who wasn't asexual. I had no idea how to think of anybody who would have any sexual feelings for anyone. That just never came up in my characters' lives. And I had to kind of think like, well, now I have to give my characters more diversity because they can't all be asexual. So I kind of started thinking, well, I put in more diversity in some of and what they would be like in that sense. And since it's heterosexual, it's not exactly anything interesting for me to explore because I'm surrounded by heterosexuals, you know? So I've been kind of thinking about some other ways I can create characters and think about their lives instead of just focusing on the way I see, my life. But yeah, then after realizing that my characters were like me, I kind of put in some emphasis on that. It's like now that I know that they were like me, I knew that they could maybe have some asexual pride stuff around. Like I thought about how they would have certain things with the asexual flag on it, you know? But that's as far as it went showing in my daydreams. I think there have been some times where I kind of explored how they would feel in situations where I guess they're kind of questioned or maybe pressured even about their orientation. But that's pretty much it.
Yeah, actually, I had a really similar thing to Wolfie. I'm asexual, among other asexual, aromantic spectrum, and then bi and trans. But um, sexual attraction really confuses me. I mean, romantic attraction does, just not as much because I do experience it, just very little. So I don't know. I always kind of very often end up making characters asexual or usually ace spectrum in some way, shape, or form. And even when I don't, it's just like my best guess, hoping what I'm having them experience is actually sexual attraction because I don't know. Like it's just hard for me to understand what it's like to be allo. That so that also goes for aromanticism. It's really hard for me to understand what it's like to completely experience romantic attraction totally normal. So I tend to consistently, without meaning to. I mean, obviously, there's times where I purposely make a character asexual or aromantic or something like that. But I very often just end up doing that by accident. Like many characters have just kind of ended up doing X by accident because it's such a big part of my experience. And then most of my characters are also most of the main characters who I think about, um, yeah, who I actually like think about and attach to are bisexual or gay or lesbian, something like that. If they're not like asexual, I don't know. Straight people just kind of bore me. Um, um, uh, yeah. I just don't. I'm generally just not interested in straight romances. By straight romances, I mean like a straight man, straight woman. Bisexual man, bisexual woman, and I can get behind that because they're both bisexual. Um, which does change the experience, even if it's a man and a woman, still does very much change the experience. Um, I just don't find it relatable. I find it kind of, I don't know how to explain. I find it kind of, it's kind of like how cliches that you see tons and tons in media kind of bore you over time. That's kind of what's like for me. It's like, oh, another straight romance? No thanks. No, this is just my personal thing. Obviously, there's nothing wrong with straight romances. Disclaimer. Um, yeah. I mean, there's many reasons why I don't find it nearly as relatable, but yeah, and I also like to have I often also bring in my own experiences with like homophobia and whatever into like it's I don't know, it's important for me to have those in my stories in my MD. So those themes come up a lot. On the flip side though, I hate having transphobia. I would just rather pretend that doesn't exist. Um, I'm trans. Yeah. I mean, I'm technically non-binary, but I don't like using the label non-binary because people hear non-binary and they think you mean some neutral in between gender when all non-binary means is you're not a binary man or a binary woman. Like non-binary can mean so many infinite different things, but people think it's neutral. So I don't like using non-binary just because that's not it for me. It's not like a neutral gender. I agender is closest probably to what I experience, but I also don't use that label because it just feels weird labeling something that it's not there, no gender. So trans for me. Anyways, but that also, besides me avoiding transphobia, that also makes it hard for me to understand gender. Like I don't really get gender; it's confusing to me. I don't really experience much of an innate sense. So in the cultures of in my main cultures, I should say there is transphobia in my world, just not the cultures I focus on, nearly as much comparatively. But in my main cultures, the concept of gender is very, very loose. So people who would be in our world called, for example, a non-binary woman, they'd probably just be called a woman. Good chance to just be called a woman in their world because the labels of woman, man are extremely loose. And just in general, the concept of gender is very loose. And I do that because trying to figure out gender and my character's genders is incredibly confusing for me. And it, yeah, I don't know, it's confusing. It gives me a headache trying to think about it. I have lots of trans characters, I do, as an analysis, but I just tend to avoid that aspect because it's confusing and I don't like thinking about transphobia. Um, I think I've talked a lot, but yeah, it's very, very involved in my daydreams. My daydreams are very, very gay, basically.
I really feel like I can relate to most things that everyone has mentioned here. I'm very open about being a trans guy, and well, my sexuality is all over the place. It's very fluid. But I've spoken about this before where I said that, it's really weird for me to be a trans guy because in my daydreams, my parami is a cisgender guy. But like that's the only thing that changes, which is it's frustrating to me because like M said, there are stuff like you know gay stuff and lesbian stuff and bisexual and all that type of stuff. But for some reason, for me, it's so difficult to just like have a trans parami. But I think that, interestingly enough, that also links to the whole being trans experience, right? It's like you have this. I have this parami who I'm working towards sort of becoming as much as possible. But that can be a good thing and a bad thing. For me personally, at least. But yeah, I really feel like I can relate to what everyone's saying here. So yeah. Um, and then the third question is, which sort of also links to the previous one, how does accepting your identity or sexuality help with your overall mental state?
Well, it's good to have a label, a word that describes what it is you're feeling. Um, and it's easy to just say it to people if they're ever like wondering what's going on with you. um, I know that when I was talking, I was asking questions like a couple years ago, or maybe just last year. I was starting to wonder if one of my characters was a romantic or not, and it turns out that he was, considering all the information I was given. So I remember one of my friends, she came up to me and she's like, "Well, I don't think labels should be created for these types of things, and that we should all just feel what we feel and things like that." And I'm like, okay, you have a point. I can see where you're coming from. But having these labels can help us just know and have a concrete definition, pretty much, about what we are feeling and what we consider to be ourselves. So it helps a little, at least with me, to know these things, to know these definitions, these words of what I am.
I definitely agree. And I think that's why it was also important for me now to come out a couple of months ago. My marriage ended amicably, so it's fine. But I had a 10-year relationship with a man. He didn't know that I was that I feel like I'm a man inside. But when it ended, I decided it's now or never. So I decided to come out to everyone, and I'm out. I'm out at work, so my colleagues call me Nathan now, or the Swedish equivalent of that name. So, and for me, it means that I can literally not put on that mask, and I'm not talking about the mask, the face mask for the pandemic here, but the mask that makes me a woman. And it's not probably a huge change for people who see me now or talk to me now, but for me, it's a huge relief, and I think it's definitely going to help with my mental state. I'm also bipolar type 2, and that has, of course, been an issue for me in my life, and I have had a lot of depressive episodes, and some of them have been closely related to my feeling of being false and not being able to be myself. And I'm sure that there will be hardships because I'm out. Not everyone accepts transgender people. But for me, not having to walk around every day and feeling false, but I can tell people I'm transgender. So if I use a binder, it's fine. If I want to wear some other kinds of clothes, like men's clothes, if I don't want to wear a dress, I don't have to. I can go to a wedding without having to wear a dress, and that's the bigger relief than you can probably imagine if you're not transgender. So to me, I think it's great if you have these labels, and it's sort of a voluntary thing to use them. I could have been probably in the closet for the rest of my life, and nobody would have known. But I prefer to use them now that they're out there, and I can identify with the label, and it's an easy way to express how I feel, and people can accept me. Hopefully, most people will accept me. So it's sort of everything to me right now.
Okay, sorry. Just coughing it out there. How does accepting? Definitely better than not accepting that. Like, to be fair, it didn't really take me much. It didn't really take me much to accept it, so I don't have much going off to compare it to, like me not accepting it, because the times where I wasn't really out, or like out to myself, is more because I didn't really realize it. And I didn't really realize it not just because I was like unself-aware, but like with bi, I didn't realize it was bi because I didn't have crushes on anyone. So like, but yeah, if if I didn't accept it, it would definitely be worse. And I know with being trans, I've gone through a lot of different trans labels because I found it incredibly confusing. And because I didn't know, I thought everyone was supposed to have an innate sense of gender, right? But I didn't have that, but I didn't realize I didn't have that, so I kept confusing things like preferred presentation with gender, things like that. And I know finally realizing, understanding my gender and my relationship with gender and with my body and presentation, things like that. I know that did help a lot with my mental state, and also I've only ID'd for asexual for maybe 2 years. Before that I ID'd as asexual spectrum. I didn't think I was completely asexual. And I thought that because I have hypersexuality, so I had kind of that internalized idea that therefore I couldn't be asexual, even though I've never experienced any sexual attraction. Um, I don't see people as sexual. The idea of people as sexual makes me uncomfortable, etc., etc., etc. And when I finally kind of went, okay, no, I am asexual, and I'm just kind of internalized this misconception that I can't be asexual, even though I knew that wasn't true. That also helped, especially for me, because I have a lot of um, self-hate, shame, guilt, whatever over my hypersexuality. So not letting that get in the way of identifying as asexual was a helpful step towards that. Yeah, like, I mean, anyone who doesn't accept their identity sexuality, that's going to take a toll on their mental state. But yeah.
Has maladaptive daydreaming helped you explore those things about yourself, Emery, and everybody else as well, but especially with Emery?
Yeah, for me, a lot of it. I know in grade grade 7 when I was 12, so I was 12 throughout all of grade 7. I know that's when I really began first questioning my sexuality and gender, actually, except I first learned about trans and stuff when I was 12. I didn't really get it, to be honest. I had the spirit though, but I remember I told my mom, I think I told her about this, and it's like, I think I'm more of a boy than a girl, and she's like, no, you're not, and then I kind of just was like, okay, and then buried that for the next few years. So that was a really brief question. My mom kind of buried that right away. Uh, but for that still, I know a lot of that I came to question through characters. Especially I have a parami. I've never known how to say that. Parami, per, param, parami. You know that thing. Self-insert. I'll just say self-insert. I have a self-insert, but nowadays I rarely daydream about my self-inserts. Back then I did daydream about my self-insert quite a lot. And I know my self-insert, I ended up making them not that cis. And I ended up having my characters be tomboy, pretend I'm doing quotations around that word, tomboy. Yeah, you can't see me doing quotations, but I am. Or I got rid of gender roles. I got rid of ideas of what men and women had to be. I got rid of strict conforming to genders, not in gender roles, but feeling like I'm strictly binary woman, but kind of having a looser sense. Like, yeah, maybe I'm woman, who cares? Things like that. And that I know helped me be a lot more loose and not loose. What's the word I'm looking for? Sorry, I'm just not good at talking today. Um, a lot more comfortable. There we go. Comfortable. That's a good word I can use here. Comfortable with gender, especially in regards to me. It made me more comfortable in the fact I didn't. I mean, I always kind of consider myself a tomboy, quotation marks again, but I don't know. I still wasn't really comfortable with it. I still felt the need to conform and things like that. And for me, tomboy was that label. If I was like that, I had to be a tomboy. I couldn't just be, me. I don't know. It's kind of hard to explain. But even tomboy feels like a specific box. I mean, besides it's a dumb label in general, but it felt like it's a specific box I had to conform to. But that did generally make me feel a lot more comfortable with gender and my gender identity and presentation. And that also helped me realize stuff about not so much I don't know how it did make me realize stuff about being bi. I daydreamed. Okay, when I was questioning, because I was in grade 7, I wasn't questioning whether I was bi, I was questioning whether I was ace. And to do that, I imagined myself kissing my classmates and other people, just imagine people. And then I always was like, you, kissing boys kind of sounds kind of gross. I'm going to imagine myself kissing girls. It didn't occur to me to question whether I was straight or whatever, even though I was literally questioning my sexuality. I don't know. And then I also, in the same year, made my parent bisexual, and it still didn't occur to me. I don't know. To be fair, I didn't really have any crushes, but that was so really funny to me in hindsight. I don't know. But with asexuality, it did. Like, I don't know. Me, it's just like imagining my characters as being asexual versus not asexual. I'm not so much my parami, but that did help me explore that. Imagining them being allo. I didn't really get it then, but that when I in later years I did the same thing, and in grade 9 when I realized I was bi, I did the same thing. Like coming to when I was kind of realizing that, and a couple months before, I started having more queer characters, more bi, lesbian, gay characters, and I started daydreaming more about different relationships that weren't straight, different or relationships that weren't monogamous, and different kinds of relationships and sexualities, which did help me feel a lot more comfortable with my bisexuality, because that was the one identity that when I realized I didn't immediately feel comfortable with. I mean, it didn't take me that long. I didn't have years of denial. It's kind of a couple months where I really wished I wasn't, because I was in a conservative Christian school. But that did help me kind of get to know myself and explore my sexuality and accept that.
What about you, Nathan? I feel like you had in sort of towards the beginning of the podcast had touched on this as well, when you were talking about how your self-insert characters were always male.
Yeah, I think in the beginning, when I was just 5, it was, I think, the same as most children do, even those who don't end up daydreaming as adults. They probably, you put yourself in the shoes of maybe a superhero or something like that, and those often happen to be male characters. I think nowadays, when I was a child, that was the case. Nowadays, we have more Wonder Woman and all strong female characters often. But at the time, like the Incredible Hulk and Dr. Banner, who would be someone I would pretend to be in my daydreams, for instance, and it was just natural for me to keep being a boy or a man. And once my sexuality woke up, so to speak, starting to feel sexual feelings, I think probably I didn't think so much about being a boy or a man. I just knew I was drawn to men, and I ended up always thinking about, almost always in the beginning, thinking about a man who was gay. First maybe I thought that, I just like men so much, so I just don't throw a woman into the equation. But very soon I realized that no, of course. I mean, I knew I wanted to be, or I felt like a boy, but I, in my world, I could fantasize about sex, which I did. I still do, and it's always just men and men. And I can speak with friends now, because they ask me, how do you know that you're transgender, or how do you know that you feel like a man inside? And if this comes up and they say, well, I also daydream from a man's perspective, but most of the people I speak with, or all of them so far that I speak with these things about, they say that they still have sex then with a woman, but I have, from a man's perspective, sex with a man. So that's the difference when I speak with people. That doesn't necessarily mean anything. I mean, in a daydream, you can daydream about whatever. For instance, I know that, also I happen to know, Dimmer, that your daydreams are usually pretty dark, and mine are too. And in my daydreams, I can be a horrible person. And that doesn't mean I want to be a horrible person, or even that I feel like a horrible person. So everything is allowed in a daydream. To me, it was just a safe space, I think, to do whatever I want, and in this case, also to have sex the way I wanted to, which is physically impossible because I don't have the right body. So I definitely explore that in my daydreams. Could be a good thing, could be a bad thing, but when you do it, it feels like a good thing. That's why you keep doing it, I guess.
I think you brought up a good point there too, that it doesn't always mean something, like with the friends that you were talking about, and even in my case too. I'm sexuality gets explored a lot in my daydreams, and sometimes it means something and sometimes it doesn't. In my case, it doesn't. But would you guys say, all of you, that in your case it did?
In my case, yes. But I think that's something that I discovered, like I briefly touched upon, in 2010, when it really hit me that they are connected.
Yeah, I think definitely it meant something because in my daydreams, sex does not happen. I don't think about sex. My characters don't think about sex. It just not a thing that happens in my life ever. Just don't think about it.
So the lack of it was your tip off?
Yeah, I mean, I guess what else would that be? I mean, I don't know how people who are, I guess, allosexual think about that. I've heard people say that it's like one guy one guy specifically said like, well, it's like an itch you have to scratch, and if you don't scratch it, it gets worse. And I'm like, that sounds like an addiction, like MD itself. And like something that doesn't happen to me in that context. I don't think about needing to engage in sexual activities or anything like that. It just doesn't happen. My characters don't have to do it. I guess that means that I'm sex repulsed and asexual.
If you see a connection between your identity and sexuality and your daydreaming, when or rather at what point did you start to realize that there could maybe be a connection between the two?
For some reason, I didn't really connect the dots. I knew that I could escape into my head and live a life like a man. And that was what I actually really wanted. But I also sort of accepted that I had a woman's body and everybody saw me as a woman, not like a very feminine woman, but still a woman, heterosexual woman. But I got into depression in 2010, and I started realizing that I had a problem with my gender identity. And I didn't know, I felt like I'm never going to be able to meet someone and actually have a relationship, have real sex. I had some sex, but I always felt like I wanted to be a man and it wasn't possible. But in 2010, I realized that it was affecting me really badly, my daydreaming. I at least I thought so. And because I felt I can't be both in my head as a man and try to live my life as a woman. I have to decide. And I actually got a diagnosis that with borderline personality disorder that year, because I think it was a wrong one. Other psychiatrists, they don't agree with that one either. But it was because I had like a poor sense of my own identity that was part of it. And in my case, I knew what it was, and I told them. But anyway, I got really, really I freaked out, and I felt that I need to come out of my head anyway. I actually told about a handful of people that I'm transgender, but I didn't want to come out to the world. So I stopped daydreaming for, like I said, 18 months. And during that time, I actually met the man that I eventually married. We had a relationship, like I said before, 10 years, a good relationship, ended this year, but we're very good friends, so it's no big drama. But I think that was actually a result of me me stopping daydreaming. So I actually want to attribute that. Oh, how do you pronounce that? Anyway, I want to, at least part of me, like to believe that my decision to stop daydreaming affected my real life very greatly, in a good way. That I actually stopped being a man inside my head and tried to live like me the best I could, with the decision I made at the time not to come out to the world, but still. So it was a very definite moment, and it was the same day as I got this borderline personality disorder diagnosis that I decided that night I'm never going to daydream again. This immersive type of daydreams. I mean, everyone daydreams, but you know what I mean. Then, unfortunately, I relapsed 18 months later due to a tragic event. And I've been daydreaming since. But at least that gave me like space to actually live my life, and I don't regret that for 1 second, obviously.
I probably first started realizing in grade 7, and then really started realizing in grade 9 and later.
Like what age is grade 8, grade 9?
Grade 8, 13, grade 9, 14. More or less, like, depending on where in the year it is and when you were born.
Okay, so we're talking about at this point you were a younger teenager.
Yeah, in grade 9 I was 14. How old? So like 5 years ago, because I'm 19 now. Yeah. So yeah, probably 5 years ago, or to a lesser degree, 7 years ago. So I'm not good at math. So around 7 years ago, so in grade 7. And then 5 years ago is when I really kind of started considering that. And a lot of it was me looking back in hindsight at my daydreams and going, oh, that I probably should have paid attention to that. Like, I don't know, like making my characters certain identities or having certain plot lines that I was projecting on that were not very straight before I realized I was not very straight. Things like that. So a lot of it was in hindsight. I did know some things in grade 7 at the time, but not that much. And then most I started noticing grade 9 and beyond.
And then, Wolfie, what about you?
Maybe I must have seen a connection 2 or 3 years ago, because that was when I really started asking questions about my characters themselves. Like, I already knew I was asexual since before I knew what MD was. So I really started doing research about other things, especially aromantic people, because I was wondering if one of my characters was like that, and he was. So yeah, it was like towards the ending years of me being in college, university. That's when I started to realize that my characters reflect me a lot, and the stories are a life that I would find fun or want to live in. Something like that, with my original characters anyway. Identity itself, like for example, gender. I was always cisgender. I never had gender dysphoria, so that's another thing that doesn't appear in my daydreams, which is why I need to. I've been thinking about, well, my characters need to be diversified because they're all like me.
So this connection, when you realize there might be a connection between identity or sexuality or whatever and maladaptive daydreaming, did that come before? I guess what came first, your awareness of maladaptive daydreaming or the connection? Like, did you only notice the connection after you realized what MD was?
I think so. I think that's pretty much what happened, because daydreaming before I knew what MD was, it was just stories in my head. I don't even know if I even called it daydreaming. It was just stuff that went on. That's how I thought about, fantasies and having characters and writing them and drawing them and all that stuff. A lot of what made them came from my head and thinking about them, like a lot, like a lot. So yeah, the connection came after I knew what MD was.
Is that the same for you guys, Em and Nathan?
No, the connection came before because I didn't know, at least not the term maladaptive daydreaming. But it's actually, yeah, but it's actually, for me, daydreaming has been so normal because I have a twin sister and she daydreams in the exact same way as I do. So even though I thought that maybe we were the only ones on the planet, it was still something that I felt was sort of natural, and something I didn't want to stop doing either. And but yeah, it's I made the connection before I knew that there was such a thing as maladaptive daydreaming.
Yeah, same as Nathan. Yeah, I figured I noticed I daydreamed a lot. I didn't think I was the only person because I knew that was pretty illogical to think I was the only person to experience it, but I didn't know there was like a name for it, a disorder for it. Though I did know I daydreamed a lot and I was frustrated about that. But even before I noticed how much I daydreamed, I had made the connection.
Do you guys feel like coming out affected your daydreams? If you are out?
Yeah, in my case, it did both times. I came out to 5 people, including my twin sister, in 2010. And like I said before, that made me quit daydreaming for a while, for a great while. And now, when I came out a couple of months ago to my other siblings and childhood friends and then friends and colleagues, for a while, it actually made me stop daydreaming. I didn't feel I needed to because I could be myself. I hoped that it would actually last. Not that I mind immersive daydreaming, but I'm still a bit like shaky or scared that being in my head the way I've been for 40 years has actually changed me as a person in a way that is not desirable. I can't do anything about it now, obviously, but anyway, it did change my daydreams coming out, I would say, even if only maybe a temporary effect, but still.
In my life, no one really cares about my identity or orientation. My parents know. They like to act clueless that they don't know what any of this is, but they know because I've told them. They should know. Um, it didn't really coming out didn't really affect my daydreams because my life continued as normal. I don't have friends in real life, so I just continue as normal. The only people who would slightly care are my parents, and they don't really care. My daydreams continue as normal, even though I freely talk about being asexual.
Did it have any effect on you, Em?
I mean, I'm not fully out, but no, not really. Even when I did come out to people, it hasn't really changed anything at all.
I feel like it will affect different people differently. Uh, but for me personally, I feel like it made my daydreams a lot less angry, sort of, which is kind of weird to say, but I think the frustration of, figuring things out and sort of being worried, in my own personal case, like I've never had to come out to my parents before, and my sisters didn't, so how's it gonna go? All that type of stuff. It's my daydreams used to be a lot more frustration focused and anger focused. So when I eventually came out as trans, I got accepted by my family, even though, some people were like, well, we don't agree with it, but do whatever. And that that really changed my daydreams to be a lot more confused during the whole transitioning phase, but also a lot more positive. So I feel like, it if you can come out and you do have support, even if it's not from family or friends, like even if it's just from online or, people reminding you that you're valid and that your identity is valid and all that, that has a really, really positive effect, even if it's subconsciously, if that makes sense. Um, but yeah, that's just my own 2 cents on that.
Isn't it so that a lot of people, or that there is often a connection between trauma and maladaptive daydreaming? And in a way, especially, I guess, being transgender is a trauma. I mean, gender dysphoria and all that. Even being gay or queer or asexual, I mean, something like that is out of the norm, and it's usually a very nervous thing to, like coming out or something like that, and you don't know what your surroundings will, like what people in your life will say. So it makes sense to me what you're saying, that your daydreams would change. Although for me personally, for some reason, it didn't really change. I just stopped. But I can see why the theme, if you were sort of trying to, what do you say, deal with that trauma through maladaptive daydreaming, it definitely makes sense that coming out would change that. It makes sense to me anyway.
Yeah, and I think that, maladaptive daydreaming is sort of our own, sort of safe place, right? So in our daydreams, we can really have anything go down or anything happen. We can have, like some guests mentioned earlier, their daydreams include a lot of different sexualities in different paras and stuff like that, and just all the. Actually, I lost my original point of thought, but basically, what I'm getting at is that, like, you know, it's our daydreams is sort of our safe haven place. So it's like it makes sense that it will affect it, but also I can definitely also see how, depending on the individual themselves, it may or may not. Um, but yeah, I do agree with what you're saying as well. Uh, cool. But and then question 8, I think we're at right now. Uh, do you think that your daydreaming affected how you eventually came out, if you did?
Actually, for me, it's actually no for me. I think it affected that I came out, so to speak, or that I actually waited 25 years to come out. But in my head, I've been coming out as a gay man thousands of times. So if I would have not been transgender, but I would have been a man or a woman, and I would have been homosexual, I think that my daydreams would probably have been not necessarily helpful, but at least I would have been daydreaming, not in the normal daydreaming sense, but in the immersive daydreaming sense, like really with a lot of feelings and emotions and different scenarios that you would replay, not just because you're practicing to come out, but because it's something you feel like maybe it's something you want to perfect, or something that you want to experience, actually, to get used to the thought of actually telling people around you. So I've been coming out, like I said, so many times as a gay man, but I will never be able to really come out as a gay man because I'm a gay transgender man, and it's not the trans part is so much more shocking to people. So when I say that my marriage was never like fake from my perspective, because I had feelings for him and attraction, I it didn't really affect the way I came out as trans. I hope you get what I mean.
Yeah, I don't think it affected how it came out to my parents, because when my parents go into such discussions and it involves me having to say I don't care about sexual relationships, then it just comes out as a way to just let them know, to educate them on what's going on with me. Be like, I'm asexual, which I've mentioned a few times, and this is what that is. This is how I feel. That's how it is. These are the facts, and there they are. That's how I come out to people. That's how I tell people about asexuality. And I'm an argumentative person. Like, I will fight anyone who tells me that I'm wrong or something like that. I don't think I've ever met an aphobic person in real life. So, but I'm like, I will not stand down. I know what I'm gonna say. I know what I feel, and that's that. Daydreaming um never really had an effect on that. I've always been somebody who's there to just tell it like it is from my perspective.
I don't know. I guess I'm kind of surprised by the answers. I thought there'd be more of a connection with that because of how people tend to use daydreaming as practice ones, like Nathan had mentioned. But Nathan wasn't practice running the real life scenario. They were practice running one that couldn't happen. And then in your case too, you're like, yeah, no, not really. So I don't know. Just interesting. That didn't go the way I thought it was going to.
Yeah. It kind of surprised me too. What people, the response from people. But maybe that is actually something that could be distinguishing normal daydreaming from immersive daydreaming. That everyone daydreams, and of course I practice what answers I will, give, even for this podcast, and because you can see some of the questions in advance. But that's just normal daydreaming. It's not like playing another role. I think a lot of people daydream about, even those who daydream about themselves, they daydream about an idealized self. So it's an idealized self would probably come out differently than your true self, because your true self might be not as self-conscious, no, not as self, not as sure of themselves. So daydreaming, like the immersive way, would probably just make everything a mess, because if you translate that into real life, it just won't work. So maybe that's actually, when I think of it, maybe that could be. It's just my theory, of course, but maybe it could be something like that.
Yeah, I agree. That is so true. It's happened to me 1,000 times. Not in this context, but just practice an argument. Is going to happen, and then you're in the argument, and all of the things that you thought of, they don't actually happen, and you just stand there like an idiot. It doesn't. Real life never actually happens the way it happens in your daydream. So even if you do practice it, it doesn't always help at all.
No, true.
I don't think we heard from Levi and M though. Did it? Did you do anything like that? Practice running? Did it help like at all with those conversations?
Nope. I did not do any practice running at all. I'm just always been really uninterested in daydreaming about myself or my life. And I mean, I guess I daydream characters coming out, but it's not as me imagining myself coming out at all. It's the situations have never applied to my life. It's just part of the story, it's part of the plot. So no, not really.
I feel like me coming out as a certain sexuality, like I've told my parents, I've gone through times where I felt like I was strictly gay, then I was strictly straight while I was still trans, um, or am still trans, and then it was asexual and bisexual. My sexuality is really, really fluid. I'm just attracted to whoever I feel like, so more pansexual, I guess. But that is stuff that I don't really think about, because it's just I'm at that stage in my life where I'm like, I am what I am and whatever. But when I had to come out as trans, that was really difficult, because I I was very new to the concept of what transgender is. And so I was like, well, how do I say this to my parents? And I think I went over it a lot in my mind, especially because I wanted to tell my mother first, because she was like the most understanding person, who I could speak to. And I revised it so many times in my head. And then eventually I just ended up being like, I think I'm trans, and that was it. But yeah, I don't think it necessarily made it any easier for me though. I was still very nervous. But yeah, I guess, I did have that whole thing run through my head over and over where it's like, what's the worst that can happen? She can say, okay, well, what this is a problem, or maybe it's not a problem, but you sort of you think of all the avenues of what could happen in case you need to be prepared for something that you're not prepared for. So yeah, that's at least my experience of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really interesting topic, but I'm a bit biased because that's how I've been using my maladaptive daydreaming or immersive daydreaming capabilities, so to speak. It's very connected. But it's I don't know if you've seen, for those of you who go to Reddit, the subreddit, and read there. Recently, I think there have been quite a few posts about this topic that are interesting, and that quite a few people have said that, oh, that's how I discovered my orientation as well. Someone says that the post, has anyone else realized that you were actually in the closet and homosexual through your daydreaming? And quite a few people have actually said something that they agree. And I think it's actually, like I said before, with this trauma aspect of maladaptive daydreaming, that you need to deal with something, and your subconscious probably chooses immersive daydreaming, which becomes maybe maladaptive daydreaming, as a form of treating this problem and exploring it and trying to find all kinds of angles to tackle it or just go with it. I think it's not surprising that people now, you see people post about it. Maybe it's just that it's a topic that people are a bit embarrassed to talk about. Otherwise, we might see more posts about it. I think it's different in different countries. In my country and in Scandinavia as a whole, I think that we tend to be quite open about these things. So if it wasn't like as sensitive a topic, I think it would be a more common topic in the subreddit. That's just what I think.
I think that too. It seems like, and I don't have hard numbers or anything to back this up, but it seems like in maladaptive daydreaming communities, there is a big LGBT population, especially on the server. And I would assume that is because of what you're saying, because the experience of not being in the norm is confusing. It can be traumatic, I guess, like you said. And how would an immersive daydreamer, deal with that? By immersively daydreaming, and then maybe it transitions into a maladaptation for some.
Yeah, I definitely agree, of course. I don't read everything in the subreddit, but it's probably true that a lot of people there are LGBTQ plus people, and like there's a lot of comorbidity with disorders as well. Like for me, I'm bipolar, and a lot of people have anxiety and all kinds of psychiatric diagnosis or personality disorders. And for the same reasoning, probably. For the same reason. Like you said, people have things they need to deal with, and the mind is, I think, very, very capable of dealing with things, trying to do you say encapsulate, encapsulating them, or try to protect your other part of the mind by wrapping this thing into your immersive daydreaming life and dealing with it, or trying to make you feel like you have a different, better life, or in my case, I throw a lot of hardships on my character, on my main parame. For some reason, I don't know, but a lot of people do. It's just, you occupy your brain with something else and you deal with it. For me, for instance, homophobia is a very, very big part of my daydreams, for apparent reasons, I guess. I mean, I want to be prepared, I guess, for whatever transphobia or homophobia that I will come across. Even if I didn't come out, I still have felt like I need to know what it is, so I just incorporate it into my daydreams. But like this comorbidity with psychiatric conditions, I think it's the same. It could be the same reason. We don't know. I mean, there's a lot of research in this field, luckily, now, and more. And but it's a theory that really appeals to me. It makes sense.
Nathan had mentioned Reddit, and there's another type of post about gender that I see on. Well, I don't want to single Reddit out because I've seen it on other platforms as well. But in the community, wherever you are, it will pop up once in a while, with some regularity. Someone saying, "I daydream about whatever it is, like they're heterosexual and they daydream mostly gay relationships, or they're gay but they daydream mostly heterosexual relationships." And they're so on behalf of all the confused people out there, I'm sure you don't. I don't know if you have answers, but like opinions. Like, what would you say to those people who are like, "Oh my, does this mean anything?"
Very, very interesting that you will ask that question, because that's sort of like a message that I would actually like to. Something I want to say on that topic, because I have a twin sister and we're identical twins. We have the same upbringing, we have the same DNA, we daydream with the same themes, but she's not transgender. So imagine trying to say to someone, well, because you daydream the way I do, or that person does, and that person or I am transgender, then you're probably transgender. I mean, no. Here's like a real proof that it can be, the circumstances can look the same and like be the same, but the outcome can be very different. So I find that really, really interesting. So when I see such a post and I choose to engage, I try to be very clear that in my case, this is the connection I made, and I see why I did like this. Especially those posts that say that when they use the opposite gender, which is probably not very inclusive, but people say that I almost always daydream like from the other perspective. What does that mean? And I say, well, in my case, it was this, but that doesn't say that it has to be the same for you. Yeah. And it's like a boring answer because they want an answer, but I just have to be very, very clear about that. So nobody should sort of judge someone else's daydream and say, you have to look into this because you're probably transgender or you're probably gay or something like that. It's not necessarily the case.
Yeah, that's something that I definitely agree with as well. I feel like, when it comes to something like being LGBTQ plus, the last thing that you want is someone to say, well, if you daydream that, then that means that this is how it is, It's definitely something that everyone has to feel comfortable with and figure out on their own. So even if it's, as mentioned, even if it's someone who isn't part of the LGBT community and they do maybe daydream about being in the LGBT community, maybe they're just figuring things out. So that's a really, really good point as well. So yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, and not necessarily only figuring things out for themselves, but it's like Wolfie mentioned that trying to make your paras more diverse makes your plots more interesting. And I mean, I definitely agree with everything you said, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're questioning anything. You just want to get different perspectives, like I do. I can be a psychopath in my daydreams and try to feel what it is not to have any empathy, or because it doesn't, it doesn't harm me as long as I don't do it every day for 4 years. Maybe then that would harm me. But it's like experimenting and see what it brings. That's the beautiful thing about daydreaming. But I guess you can like with any addiction, if it gets too appealing and you tend to do it all the time, it's probably bad for you. But it's I think some people might be nervous about what this all means, but if they're actually asking the question, they're probably, even though they probably sometimes do it very anonymously because it's on Reddit and you don't have to tell people where you're from, etc., and who you are. If you're actually asking the question, then you at least had the courage to ask the question and you realize that you sort of want people's input. Some people might do this and not even want to ask anyone, what does this mean? Does this mean that I'm gay? I don't want to be gay, things like that, which is sort of natural. It's like you said, questioning, but it doesn't mean to. It could be just to add another perspective, I think, to your daydream.
Wolfie, any thoughts on that? Anything to say to those confused people?
Yeah, it's just, I would say, do a bunch of researching on your own part about these things anyway, just so you can know. That's what I had to do, when I was trying to figure out what these characters were feeling in in my daydreams, because I didn't really have a way to describe it. It sounded like certain things, but I didn't know. I had to ask questions and do my own research, asking people who actually know more about these things than I do. But again, yeah, if they appear in your daydreams and you're just having fun in searching, or I mean, like, not exactly soul searching, but like just having fun with your characters and those perspectives, there's nothing wrong with that. And I mean, it all depends on how you feel inside. Like someone said to me, just feel how you feel. It doesn't, your daydreams don't always represent what you are like as in yourself.
I agree completely. Oh, and I think it's hard for maladaptive daydreamers to see, especially if they're like at the height of their maladaptive daydreaming, where they're spending so much time as this other persona that maybe they internalize a lot of that. Whether it's a different gender identity or whether it's the violence, like Nathan I think mentioned that a little while ago, and you just start wondering, am I this, am I that? But yeah, I think it's hard sometimes for a maladaptive daydreamer to separate them completely. Like to really realize that, oh, these are just fantasies and they don't necessarily mean anything for my lived experience.
What message would you give to members of the LGBTQ and MD community? How about those in both?
Yeah, for me, I think that the message I would like to give to people, I think that, sexuality and gender can be extremely confusing and it can be frustrating, but it can also be positive and beautiful, and it can bring you to a state where you feel way more comfortable with yourself. And even if you have to go through like testing certain things out, maladaptive daydreaming can play a role in that, where you're uncertain and now you're feeling, wait, but if I'm not really this, then what's going to happen? And I don't know if I'm making sense, but basically what I'm saying is, just sort of allow yourself and your maladaptive daydreaming to test things out when it comes to your gender identity and to your romantic and sexual attraction. And yeah, I mean, like being on this spectrum, you don't have to be confined to certain rules and things like that. You don't have to come out as gay and then forever be gay and stuff like that. It's okay to go through these things and to figure it out. So my point or my advice is just give yourself time and give yourself that allow yourself to explore your identities and your sexual identities and your your sexual orientation and your romantic orientations and stuff like that, and allow your maladaptive daydreaming or your daydreams to also play a part in to help you figure out how you feel about these things. So yeah, hopefully that made sense.
There must be a lot of similar like stories out there. Similar, but of course every story is unique.
Definitely. I think there are so many stories out there, and we can only get 3 on a podcast. Maybe we could do it again sometime, though. I have, that's what we're trying to do. Just get it out, experience by experience.
Yeah, we can ask people to share their thoughts in the comments if they're listening on YouTube. And then, they can tell their own stories if they feel comfortable to do so and say what they related with, what they agree with, what they don't agree with, if that happens as well. And yeah, just like strike up a conversation. That's also appreciated.
I know. I can't believe Craig lasted. I don't think there's any way to leave comments on Spotify, but if you are listening on Spotify or something, a platform where there are no comments, we also post this on YouTube, so you can join in the conversation by tracking down our YouTube, which is just called Parallel Lives. We'll have a couple of resources in the description for you guys to check out. If you want to listen in as part of the audience or be a guest, you can join the Discord, also linked in the description. Add the podcast role to yourself. That's where we plan all the episodes, so you'll get pinged with the updates. Yeah, we publish on the 1st and 16th of every month, and thanks for listening. Like, subscribe, follow, whatever the buttons are where you're listening to us from. And that was the best outro I ever did.
Was it? I think something interfered with my microphone. There was a car outside. It was really loud. I was like,
I don't think so. I didn't hear anything.
My best outro ever, and Wolfie didn't even.